Hi, so today I'm going to be talking about the Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. This is a book I read throughout the month of September as part of a read-along hosted by Adam at Memento Mori. As you can see, I tabbed the heck out of it, I wrote in it, I underlined passages, I literally poked the heck out of it, and I had fun doing it. Boccaccio started writing this book after the Black Death occurred in Florence in 1348, and that's pretty much the time setting where this book takes place. We followed 10 young Florentines, 7 women and 3 men, as they seek to escape the plague. They leave the city and head out to the country, and they bring along their servants as they act as sort of like a buffer between them and the outside world, and only bring them news if it's any good news. The Decameron takes place over a 10-day period in which these 10 young Florentines tell 10 stories a day over the course of 10 days for 100 stories, which make up the entire book. Now, the women are, and I'll have to refer to my notes here, the women are named Pampanea, Fiammetta, Filomena, Emilia, Loretta, Nephile, and Alyssa, and the men are Panfilo, Philostrato, and Dioneo. Now, each day one of these is crowned as the monarch, and they decide the topic that the stories will feature. Now, these particular names are, of course, allegorical references to previous works by Boccaccio or people of the day, but they're supposed to give sort of an idea behind the character, but I never got a feel for these characters, with the possible exception of Dioneo, who is, as Adam described him, the horn dog of the group. He's the lustful one, and all his stories reflect that feature. But the rest of the characters, for the most part, seem to fade in the background behind the stories that they tell. So day one, the topic is they're free to speak on whatever each of them finds most agreeable. And for that, story one kind of stood out in my mind. We have a rather deceitful man by the name of Ciappaletto. He is a notary who falsifies records. He will willingly wound or kill a man with his own bare hands. He is a blasphemer of God. He never goes to church. Pretty evil. And while he's out on a business venture, he falls terminally ill, and overhears some people talking about him, saying what a bad man he is. He'll never confess his sins, and his body will just be chucked in a garbage pit. So he's horrified about this thought, and he decides to try to find a solution. And his is a deceitful one. He deceives one of the most holiest friars by confessing some of the most minor sins as if they're horrendous sins, and the friar thinks that this must be a very pious man if he finds these minor sins to be so big that he has to confess these. And when Ciappaletto passes away, he's deemed very holy and given a Christian burial and everything, and named a saint. So a bit ironical at the end. Story 2 also stood out for me too, where we have a Christian trying to convert a Jew to Christianity, and he thinks he's almost there, but the Jew says he first wants to meet the Vicar of God on earth. He wants to go to Rome and observe his habits and the habits of the brothers and the cardinals. But the Christian's terrified. If this man goes to Rome, he's going to see the wickedness of the Christians there, and he'll never want to convert. Or if he had already converted, he'll switch back. But on a weird, again, ironical kind of twist, the Jew comes back saying he saw nothing but wickedness and the filthy lives of the clergy there. But the fact that Christianity seems to continue to grow and be resplendent and everything, he thinks the Holy Spirit must exist. And therefore he decides to convert to Christianity. There are many references to religion and priests and friars and nuns within the Decameron, and Boccaccio doesn't shine a very good light on them. Moving on to day 2, they speak of people who, after suffering through many misfortunes, arrive at a happy end beyond anything that they could have hoped for. There weren't any particular stories that stood out to me for that particular day. On day 3, they speak of people who have relied on their resourcefulness to acquire something they really desired or recover something they had lost. The thing that stood out the most for me would have to be story 10 on day 3, told by Dioneo. One of the more dirtier stories of the Decameron. Not surprisingly, it involves a monk and a very young, naive woman, very innocent, and it invoked a holy crap kind of reaction in me. I'll just leave it at that. Moving on to day 4, they speak of those whose lives came to an unhappy end, and within that day was one of my favorite stories, which was the first story of the day. It had a Romeo and Juliet kind of feel to it, a tale of true devotion, but also a tragic ending. Story 5 on day 4 also appealed to me. This was a story of devotion, but on a more gruesome side. We have a woman named Lisabetta whose brothers kill her lover, and in a dream it's revealed where his body is, and she goes and digs it up, taking the head because she can't lift the whole body. She takes the head, buries it in a pot of basil, and carries it around with her, weeping lamently over her lost love. The brothers end up discovering the head within the pot, and take it away, and she dies of grief in the end. Again, a tragic ending, bit, like I said, on the gruesome side. Moving on to day 5, we have, they speak of lovers who, after terrible accident or misfortunes, finally found happiness. The story of day 9 also appealed to me. We have a man named Federico. He spends his entire life and his entire fortune on a woman that he is courting, but she doesn't take any notice of him. And in the end, all he's left with is his falcon, his beloved falcon, which he uses to hunt with. And the woman's son, her young son, used to go out hunting with Federico and loves the falcon and everything. And the boy falls very, very ill. And the mother is very worried. She asks, is there anything I can get to comfort you? And he says that if she could arrange for him to have Federico's falcon, he might feel that he could recover. So the woman goes to Federico's home and apologizes for any harm that he may have suffered for loving her more than he should have. And she offers to enjoy a simple meal at his home where she hopes to bring up the topic of the falcon. In a twist of irony, which seems to pop up every once in a while in the Decameron, the only thing he has to offer her is his falcon. So he kills it and serves it up for her. And when she discovers what has happened, she's horrified. But she's also filled with admiration at his magnanimity, even in the face of his extreme poverty. Sadly, the boy dies, but in the end, her brothers urge her, it's time for her to remarry and find some happiness, and she chooses Federico. They're horrified. Why would you choose a man of such poverty? And her response is that she'd rather have a man of riches than riches without a man. Moving on to day 6, our topic is, they speak of those who, having been provoked by some eloquent witticism, have replied in kind, or who with a prompt retort or strategic maneuver have managed to avoid danger, loss, or ridicule. I found these stories pretty weak. They were very short and not very well developed, and I didn't find any standouts within that day. Day 7, King Dioneo. His topic is, they speak about the tricks that women, either for the sake of love or self-preservation, have played on their husbands, whether these tricks were ever discovered by them or not. Pretty much the topic is self-explanatory, the types of stories encountered in this day. Horrible behavior by women played on their husbands so that they could be with their lovers. Day 8, Queen Loretta. She decides to turn the tables. She's upset and offended by the topics of day 7 and wants to show that men can be just as deceitful as women. But then she takes the higher hand, and instead of just choosing stories in that mode, she shows basically tricks between women, between men, and then tricks played by men on women. This is a theme that kind of carries on beyond this particular day, where the stories kind of reflect this ongoing theme, as if people didn't want to let it go. But on day 8, one of the stories that stood out to me was story 3. We have a recurring character within the Decameron called Caladrino. He's a bit of an idiot. He's constantly being tricked by Bruno and Buffalmacco. In this story, he is told there are these special stones that if you find them and carry them about your person, you'll be invisible. No one will see you. This story reminded me a lot of the Emperor's New Clothes. Everyone's like, oh, what a beautiful outfit you have, and he's actually standing there naked. Well, in this case, he thinks no one can see him. He has these stones. He returns home, and his wife immediately says, what are you doing with all these stones? And he goes off in a rage. He beats her senseless, nearly to death. That's where the humor kind of just went right out of the story for me. He goes on a rage about this, believing that the special powers of the stones disappeared in the presence of a woman. This always tends to happen. In the end, Bruno and his friend help him reconcile with his wife, but many of the stories within the Decameron are brutal, and I found sometimes difficult. And it was also, like, the next day, you'd see, like, the reaction of the other Florentines to those stories, and they'd either laugh or take pleasure in the stories, and I'm thinking, what was pleasure about this woman nearly being beaten to death? I found it a bit disturbing at times. One of the most brutal stories in the Decameron appears on day 8. It's story number 7. We have a scholar who falls in love with a widow, but she's in love with someone else. And she pulls the most horrible trick on the scholar, making him spend the night in kind of an enclosed courtyard, waiting for her in the snow and freezing cold. All night long he's waiting, and a maid comes out and says, as soon as this other person leaves, she can let you in, blah, blah, blah. But he's terrified. Either let me go home or let me in. I can't bear this freezing cold anymore. But she makes him stay out there the whole night. He eventually goes home. And then later in the story, due to this woman's own foolishness, she falls into his trap of revenge. She ends up naked on top of a tower in the scorching hot sun till the skin is blistering and peeling. She's dying of thirst. It's just horrific. This story was one of the longer ones in here, and the suffering and humiliation of both of these characters just became unbearable. On day 9 is kind of a similar topic that we had in day 1. They all speak as they wish to on whatever topic they want. There were some funny stories within this particular day. The second story of day 9, we have an abbess who hurriedly leaves the bed of her lover in an attempt to catch another nun with a man in her bed. And in her haste, the abbess, instead of grabbing her habit and throwing it on her head, grabs the undergarments of her lover and throws them on top of her head. Of course, when she's discovered wearing this, she can no longer punish this other nun because she's engaging in the same behavior. I kind of laughed at that one. Moving on to story 3, we have the return of Bruno and Buffalmacco and the idiot Caladrino. They make him believe he's pregnant in the story. That gives you an idea of what an idiot this guy is. And then again, story 5 also features Caladrino. He falls in love with a young woman, and Bruno kind of plays a trick on him. Caladrino's wife discovers his unfaithfulness, and she lets him have it. So we get a little karma, a little payback for what the wife had to go through in a previous story where he nearly beat her to death. So that was kind of justifying. Moving on to day 10, the topic is they all speak of those who have acted with liberality and magnificence, whether in matters of love or otherwise. It's probably my favorite day within the entire Decameron. Just a good feeling overall of most of the stories. And I'll just pick one of them because it's getting kind of long in this video, but the story number 9 was my other favorite story within it. We have a man named Saladin. He's a sultan. And he disguises himself as a merchant as he's visiting the country. There's an upcoming war, and he's kind of scouting out the area. And as he's traveling along with his party, he's met by another man. This man is Torello. And he shows him the most unbelievable generosity. He guides him on his way. He invites him to his home, gives him a meal, fresh clothing, fresh horses, guides him further on his journey. Saladin is just absolutely amazed at the generosity of this man for a complete stranger. Then the Crusades launched. Torello goes off to fight and gives his wife kind of a time period in which to wait before she remarries in case he fails to return home, just to be sure that he's dead. Torello ends up being captured, and he's brought before the Sultan, who happens to be Saladin. And he recognizes Torello as this most generous man, and he reveals himself now in his finery that he was this, merchant that was traveling before. And they have this happy reunion. Saladin has a chance to repay the kindness that he was shown. And he entertains him lavishly in return. And then in a bit of magical realism, which we hadn't really seen in the stories before, he transports him overnight back home to his wife in time before her remarriage to another man. Now, I can describe the stories as a whole by giving this book a subtitle. The Decameron, Tales of Debauchery, Deceit, and Devotion. But there are many stories. Like I said, I love the stories of the devotion, but in some cases it went to the obsessiveness and disturbing characters, moral behavior. There are many places also where women are described as being inferior to men, so sort of a sexist attitude to it, but let me go on to talk more about that. Day 1, and I'm going to refer to my notes here, the Day 1 introduction, Philomena says, "Remember, we are all women, and every one of us is sufficiently adult to recognize how women, when left to themselves in a group, can be quite irrational, and how without a man to look after them, they can be terribly disorganized." Elisa says, "It is certainly true that a man is the head of a woman, and without a man to guide us, only rarely does anything we do accord us praise." Day 2, story 9, within one of the stories, It's always been my understanding that man is the noblest animal among all mortal beings created by God, and that woman comes right after him. Moreover, man is generally believed to be the more perfect of the two, as his actions also demonstrate. Women are generally more fickle. But there are also very many strong-minded women within the Decameron. Pampanea, she's the one who came up with the idea of forming this group as a whole and organizing everything and moving them out into the country. Bundeaneo chooses his topic of women deceiving men. Loretta turns the tables and shows that men can be just as deceitful. Also, at the start of day 6, Lycheska, she's one of the servants, she violently interrupts the group. She comes charging in there, just scolding one of her fellow servants, Tindaro. He doesn't get a chance to say anything in his defense, and she just says that women should not be controlled by men at all, and proclaims it the right of every wife to play tricks on her husband. She's speaking out against man and male authority in general, so that was nice to see, a little feminist twist to it. All this being said, on Steve Donahue's channel, during one of his wonderful rants, and I love a good rant from Steve. I think it was at the end of one of his ShakeTube videos, so it might be hard to find, but he made a valid point about judging ancient works by today's moral standards. As a reader in this era, I couldn't help but see these depictions of sexist attitudes, but Steve is right in stating you can't hold an author from a bygone era accountable for the moral standards of today. I mean, what are authors or readers going to think about the books they read in the future that were written today? So, yeah, you can't say that it's not a worthwhile piece of work because of the way it portrays women back then. I mean, that was a different time period to now. It glaringly will stand out as a reader of today, like it did for me, but it doesn't make this any less worth value, to read. It gives us an insightful life of what was life for women, at that time. A major part of the Decameron is a frame containing these 10 Florentines and the 100 stories they tell, but surrounding that is another frame, as it's described in the introduction, created by the author to us, the reader. And we see that in the preface, introduction to day 4, and in the author's conclusion. And the author's conclusion is very important. Don't skim right over that, because that puts what I just said just a moment ago into context. Boccaccio says, "For what seems absolutely clear to me is that these tales do not enjoy the special privilege of being immune to criticism. Whoever reads these stories can skip over those that give offense, and read only those that promise delight. For lest anyone should be deceived, each story bears a sign on its brow of that which it keeps hidden within its bosom." And that sign on the brow refers to the little synopsis you get at the beginning of each story. So if you see something, offensive, don't read the story. He also references his disdain for religious authority. There are still others who will say that I have an evil and venomous tongue because in certain places I have told the truth about friars. Friars are truly great men who flee hardships for the love of God. He's pretty much saying they're lazy right there. Do their grinding when the mill pond is full. Sexual reference right there. And never blab about it afterwards. They may just lie. So he's quite unapologetic about the way he portrays religious authority. But not to say that he isn't religious himself, because he does thank God within the book as well. So at the conclusion of day 10 within the story itself, King Panfilo suggests returning to Florence, but if the group decides otherwise, he has someone in mind to bestow the crown to on the next day. I'm kind of curious who that might have been in the end, but in the end the group takes a suggestion and returns to Florence, and I concluded the book. So I'm really glad I read this. I hadn't even heard of it, to be quite honest. I probably received it at work, didn't take another second look at it until Adam happened to mention it. I picked up a copy. I even saw Steve's blurb within the pages of it, and I thoroughly enjoyed the read. I thoroughly enjoyed exploring it and digging into it and just kind of, like I said, picking it apart, and definitely recommend picking it up. Break it up into little sections to make it more accessible, and yeah, have fun with it. So again, hope you guys enjoyed this little review synopsis of the book, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Okay, it's starting to rain and it's freezing out here.